Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Helen Seslowski. I'm the events director for Oblong Books, and we're based in New York's Hudson Valley. This evening's Hudson Valley YA Society panel is presented in partnership with Red Hook Public Library, Tivoli Free Library, Starr Library, Rhinebeck and Morton Memorial Library as part of the National Endowment for the Arts Big Read. The Big Read is going on all month, and it's spearheaded in our area by Bard College and a host of local partners. And for more information about the Big Read and for a calendar of events, you can visit bard.edu/Big Read, and I'll be putting that link in the chat later on. The event will be presented in both English and Spanish through live simultaneous translation. And the translator will appear shortly after I've made my opening remarks and let you know if you would like to listen in Spanish, how you can do that. A reminder that if you have any questions for our authors, please type them into the chat or in the Q&A, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. And you can type those questions in English or Spanish, and we will answer them at the end of the conversation portion of the program. We are delighted this evening to welcome authors Adi Alsaid, Margarita Longoria, and Maria Andreu, who will be talking with Nora Kindley of Rhinebeck Central School District about their YA books and the themes within them that resonate with this year's Big Read featured book, The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. Adi Alsaid's exceptional and powerful anthology, Come On In, 15 stories about immigration and finding home, contains stories by YA authors who have all been shaped by their journeys that they and their families have taken from home to find home. Born and raised in Mexico City, Adi is the author of several young adult novels, including Let's Get Lost, We Didn't Ask for This, and North of Happy, which was a Kirkus Best Books nominee. And he's joining us today from Chicago, where he lives with his wife and 2 cats, and where he occasionally spills hot sauce on things and cats, apparently. Margarita Longoria is a lifelong bookworm, book blogger, and a high school librarian in South Texas. She is the founder of Border Book Bash, celebrating teens and tweens of the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, where she grew up. Her anthology of short stories, Living Beyond Borders, Growing Up Mexican in America, is a powerful exploration of what it means to be Mexican American. You can follow Margie on Instagram at Margie Must Reads. Maria Andreu is an Argentinian-American author whose work has appeared in Teen Vogue, Newsweek, The Washington Post, and the New York Star Ledger. Her debut young adult novel, The Secret Side of Empty, inspired by her experiences as an undocumented immigrant and a speaker of English as a second language, was a Junior Library Guild selection, a National Indie Excellence Book Award winner, and an International Latino Book Awards finalist. Love in English is her fresh, joyful YA novel, which is layered with themes of immigration, cultural identity, and finding your voice in any language. In the book, 16-year-old Anna is a poet and a lover of language, except that since she moved to New Jersey from Argentina, she can barely find the words to express how she feels. Copies of all 3 books are available in our stores and online through oblongbooks.com, and I'm going to post the links for those in the chat also a little later on if you'd like to purchase a copy. Moderating our conversation today, we're delighted to welcome Nora Kindley, who is a librarian for Rhinebeck Central School District. But just before we hand over to Nora and meet our authors, I'm going to briefly hand over to Rosie Rousseau, who can explain how to access simultaneous translation for this event for those of you who wish to listen in Spanish. Rosie, over to you. Rosie, we're unable to hear you. Ah. You are unmuted. Can't hear you, sorry. Can you try now? Sorry, everyone. Few troubles. You're not muted at my end, Rosie. Okay, how about that? Made you a co-host. Can you? Pardon me, everyone. We'll be with you. Bear with us.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Welcome, thank you. Hola, mi nombre es Rosie y soy la intérprete para este evento. Hello, my name is Rosie and I'm the interpreter for this event. La función de interpretación ya está activada. The interpretation function is already activated. Para acceder la función desde su computadora, busque el globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla y elija interpretación de idiomas. Luego seleccione el canal de idioma. To access the function from your computer, find the globe on the bottom of your screen and choose language interpretation. Then select your language channel. Para acceder a la función desde su teléfono o tableta, busque los 3 puntos en la parte inferior de su pantalla y toque más. Luego interpretación de idiomas y seleccione canal de idiomas y toque finalizar. To access the function from your phone or tablet, find the 3 dots on the bottom of your screen and select more. Then language interpretation, select your language and then click done. Si tiene dificultad accediendo a la función de interpretación, por favor mandarle un mensaje a Nora por el chat y le ayudarán a resolverlo. If you have any difficulties with the interpretation function, you can send a message in the chat and it will be resolved or we will help you resolve it. Ya comenzamos con la función de interpretación simultánea. We will now begin with simultaneous interpreting and we'll hand it back to Nora. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, is everyone ready? We're good. Okay, hi everybody. I guess I was hoping just to start today, maybe we could take a second and just talk about House on Mango Street and what influence it had on anybody. And I know I was a high school English teacher in New York City, and I taught that book, and it always really resonated with students. And it's just such an accessible text that, you know, still is alive. Such a great influence. So I'm just wondering if we could start, if you have any comments on that.
Absolutely, I can jump. Oh yeah, no, you go, Margie, go.
Well, House on Mango Street, Sandra Cisneros is very, like she's an important writer in our particular like genre, the Mexican American Chicana genre, and she's who we consider, she's one of like our pioneers, like our godmother, right? And House on Mango Street has always been, I remember I read it with my 8th graders. I taught 8th grade about 16 years ago. And at that time there wasn't, and there still really isn't, a lot of Mexican American literature for young people. And House on Mango Street really isn't written for young people, but I was able to pull certain stories from it to use in my classroom. And anthologies are perfect for the classroom. So House on Mango Street was kind of like one of those gateways for my 8th graders to learn and to know and to see themselves in stories where they had never really seen them before. So I loved it for that reason, because it was able to make them see, like they were they liked to be able to see another Mexican character in a story, and they could identify and relate to the text. So House on Mango Street means a lot to us.
Great. Great. Maria, did you have an answer?
I did, only I hadn't put together the Chicago connection until right now. So I was like, Adi should probably also go. Do you have a thing? I don't want to jump in.
Well, I actually came to the House on Mango Street much later in life. I grew up in Mexico, but I went to an international school where, you know, it wasn't in the curriculum at all. I actually grew up like with like English literature on one side and Spanish literature on the other, and there wasn't a lot of crossover. Like in the Spanish literature classes, I was reading a lot of Latin American authors, not as many Mexican ones actually, but like Garcia Marquez and like Isabel Allende. But yeah, only read House on Mango Street for the first time a couple years ago.
That's awesome. Yeah, for me, House on Mango Street, when I got the email inviting me to this, it was such an emotional experience because it's a little bit of a story. So my mom grew up in Argentina, very smart, did really well in school, but they were very poor. And so she had to quit school when she was a sophomore in high school to work to help support her family. And she made a promise to her mother that she would go back one day. And then when she was like 19 or 20, she and my father moved here, and, you know, she didn't speak the language for many years. So she was probably like in her 30s before she went to get her GED. And then after she got her GED, she started going to community college. And I remember her coming, I remember her coming home really, really excited one day about an assignment of a book that she'd gotten, and it was House on Mango Street, because she was like, I've never read a book, and we're not Mexican, so it wasn't about us, but in so many ways it was. She was like, I'd never read a book that told stories like ours. It was such an important moment for her, and it was part of a writing class actually. So then they invited her to write a story about herself, and like she wrote about her mother's kitchen and stuff. So it was a very like early now that I'm thinking about it, no, I thought it was in my 20s. She would have been in her 40s when she went back to school. So it was a very like visceral experience of the power of seeing yourself in a book. And so I only ever saw her copy, but when I got invited to do this, I got my own. So it's a really special book, I know, to a lot of people.
Great. Good. So it's interesting using it with 8th graders and college students. I think that really shows the range that that the book has and how much it can mean to people in so many different ways. So that's great. Okay, great. So I'm just hoping maybe we could talk a little bit about your work. And maybe just starting with the anthologies and how those came about, and maybe just your experiences with that, and then talk also about novels that you've all written, and of course, Love in English specifically today. But yes, maybe starting with the anthologies, maybe Margie or Adi. I don't know who wants to go first.
Go ahead, Margie.
Our anthology is called Living Beyond Borders, Growing Up Mexican in America. And again, it goes back to when I taught 8th grade, and there wasn't a lot of books by Mexican American writers for my students. We read everything in my class. We read The Outsiders and Twilight and Harry Potter, and we loved everything. But there's just something about being able to see yourself in a book, see like your culture in a book, I would see my kids' faces light up. So I kind of went and searched for more of that, and I found some. Dania's The Jumping Tree, Viola Canales. There was a couple of Sandra Cisneros that I was able to use in class. And then fast forward to whenever I was a librarian, and I've been a librarian for 10 years, but it was a couple of years ago when the Mexican culture, the Mexican people were being, I think, wrongly, there was just a bunch of things going on in the news. They were saying ugly things about the Mexican people, Mexico in itself. And I remember getting really angry, and I wanted to do something. Like I felt like I needed to do something to kind of like stop this. I wanted, you know, this ugly things, that the stereotypes that they were saying about Mexicans. So I told myself that I thought like, okay, I'm gonna do an anthology, because anthologies are perfect because they're non-threatening, they're short stories, they're poems. Anybody can, you know, you might not love everything in the book, but there's something in the book somebody will, you know, you'll find something that you like, everybody can connect to, and they're perfect for classrooms. And that's what was really important to me, was for our kids to show our young adults, and to show the world's young adults, that Mexicans and Mexican Americans aren't bad people, that we're not rapists, that we're not, you know, terrible, bad hombres or anything like that. We are good people. We have a beautiful culture. And so I wanted to do that. So I kind of, I asked one of my really good friends, Guadalupe Garcia McCall, I asked her, like, what do you think about this idea? And she's like, I love it. Let's go, let's do it. So I went and I asked everybody that we knew in our little small community of Mexican American writers. Some people said yes, some people said no. And those that said yes, we kind of just went on, like, we did it. We jumped head, you know, feet first, and here we are with our beautiful anthology for young adults and for everybody. You know, we're very proud of the work that we did in this book. It spans, like, there's different eras, time eras, different ages. We've got some very seasoned writers, the brand new writers. There's, you know, essays and poems, short stories, magical realism. There's everything in it, and comics even. I know that it's my book, but I think it's the most beautiful anthology I've ever liked. I just love it so much, and I'm very grateful that I was able to do this. I was given the opportunity to do this with my friends and get our stories, our beautiful stories, out into the world.
Yeah, for me and for Come On In, it, you know, a similar like desire of seeing more stories represented about immigrants and immigration. But before that, it actually started with just like the fact that more YA anthologies were coming out, and short stories were my first love in literature, and just like really excited that short stories were becoming, you know, more popular, and wanting to jump on that. And then as I was thinking, like, okay, what central theme can I use to tie together an anthology? It was right around the time I was starting my immigration process for the US. And then I was thinking about my long family history of immigration, you know, not just me moving to the US, but my parents moved from Israel to Mexico. My grandparents were from Syria and Bulgaria, moved to Israel and then to Mexico. So it's something that's in my family. And especially when I'm in the US, when I mention, you know, like my name and the fact that I'm perfectly fluent in Spanish and in English, people are just like very confused. And part of that is that there aren't enough stories about, you know, all the many ways that immigrants, you know, like the many stories that immigrants have are often issued by just like one or two stories that the media likes to focus in on. And so I just wanted to do what I could to put a few more stories about immigrants and immigration out into the world.
Great. Great. And I think, yeah, your anthology then sort of ties into Maria's book, which is that cross-cultural experience I think a lot of people have, right, and coming to the United States, of meeting, like in your book, having all types of ENL students interacting with each other. But I guess, Maria, maybe you could just speak about how your book came about. And I think you're muted.
I am muted. You'd figure I'd know that by now. Yeah, I have cats that are being noisy, so I'm trying to spare you all. So my first book was a very personal story about it's fiction about a girl who was undocumented, but I was undocumented, and so there was a lot of that. And then when it came time to write Love in English, like I wanted, you know, it's still the issues that were coming up for me were around immigration, but I wanted to focus on a different aspect of it, right? Like being undocumented, you know, it it's very scary and it's really difficult. And so if you incorporate that into a book, generally that's what the book is about. And so I wanted to explore a different part of the experience. And so as I thought about it, another big hallmark of having moved here for me was what it was like to not speak English. I was younger than the character in Love and English. I was 8 and Anna's 16, but I still have really strong memories of sitting in a class and being like, what's everyone talking about? Like, I didn't go to a school with ESL or anything. So I just sort of like, I remember thinking in 3rd grade, like, maybe this is just my life now. I should just sit in a classroom where I don't understand, because you don't know, you've never done it before. You don't know how long it's going to take or whatever. And so as I was exploring what other aspect of the immigration experience I wanted to talk about, I zeroed in on that, and I created this character who gets here, and one of her, what she would consider one of her superpowers, is she really loves using words to express herself in her native language in Spanish. And then, who are we if the thing we think defines us isn't available to us anymore? And so, but also, I wanted to not go so far into like the really painful stuff. So she's got papers, and it's a love story, and it's kind of like a YA rom-com in some ways, but it's woven in with this experience of learning the language.
Right. Great. And I think also, just a lot of adjustment, right? And having to go through those experiences. And then I think ultimately, do you feel like ultimately it feels like a positive for her experiences with ENL in your book and or ESL? And maybe
for sure. Every time I talk to teachers about it, people are, or teenagers who have read it, they're like, oh, I love this teacher. He's quirky and probably gets away with stuff that some teachers wouldn't get away with. And I always say, I wrote the teacher I wish I'd had. I had great teachers, but in that first experience of like, what's going on, I'm super lost and disoriented. I would have loved to have had a teacher like Mr. T. So I wrote him.
Great. And that was a question I had. Are there any ideal sort of experiences for young kids coming into the U.S., maybe not speaking English or only speaking some, that the way schools or teachers or students can be more supportive or work towards a better system?
I know that now, like there's a story in my anthology that it's called My Name is Dolores, and it's a story about a little girl who was going to school and she couldn't speak English, and she was scared to death, asking her parents, like, what do I say when the teacher talks to me? And they tell her, just say, my name is Dolores, my name is Dolores. And I remember when Lupe sent me that story, I cried. I remember just thinking that, like, because that was my mom as a child. My mother didn't speak English. So, and my mother was a migrant farm worker, and they would travel. So when they'd come back home, they would throw them in a classroom and nobody taught them. My mom basically taught herself English, basically, I think that's why, and she's a retired first grade teacher. And I think that's why she's such a wonderful teacher, because she didn't have it was hard for her as a child. And I read that story and I thought, how much things have changed and how we're doing a lot better, but we still need to do better. Because I was, like I said, a teacher too. And I taught what we called the sheltered instruction kids. And they were first, like they couldn't speak English. Some of them couldn't speak English. And, we were supposed to teach them in English, but how hard when you see their little faces and they have no idea what you're saying, me inside, I had to explain myself. And I was lucky because where I live, everybody speaks Spanish. So they would come and speak in Spanish. So I was able to communicate. I just think about these kids that speak Korean or Japanese or something that you can't, like, I wouldn't have been able to communicate with those kids because I don't speak that language, but I was able to communicate with the kids I taught. So I think, we're doing better as far as education in the United States, but we need to do much better. Like we still need work, but it's really hard for them.
Right. I guess probably, Mars, you're the only teacher, right? So maybe had like the teacher side of it. But I think that is a good start. So I guess just a few other questions. I'm just gonna check our time. I think we have, yeah, we're good. I think I think that a lot of the stories, right, because are really about friendship and navigating all those YA themes, friendship, love, acceptance. In terms of you all as writers, what's your sort of hope that your readers are going to get from reading these stories?
Well, I'll jump in here. What I say ties together all my novels and my short stories that I contributed to other anthologies and to Come On In, is basically like, you know, coming of age. And it's a constant exploration of figuring out who you are and how you fit into the world around you. I think all my stories are very different, but they're all basically about that, about figuring out who you are, how you fit into the world around you. And I think I write about that because it's kind of like granting permission to my previous teenage self and to my teen readers that's to be expected. Not only are you going to go through that in your teenage years, you go through that over and over again throughout your life. It's kind of like what life is about. And so I think that's basically what I'm constantly exploring in my books and my stories. Just that idea of how we fit into the world around us.
And what I love about Maria's stories and Adi's stories are the fact that they're not, a lot of times when people write or people feel, you know, the stories about people of color, like the story always has to be the struggle and always has to be like a depressing story. And the thing is, no, like we have happiness and we have joy. And these two do beautiful work expressing that in their novels. I'm a big fan of both of them. So like, I know their stories are just showing that we are just like everybody else. We laugh, we cry, we have families, we have joy, we have sadness, pain, you know, everything, but it's all like the human experience. And I think that's very important to understand that we all feel that. It's not just one particular type of people or whatever. So their stories are good for that.
Yeah.
Happiness, joy.
Happiness and joy are good. Yeah. And I also have a deep respect for the teen years. I think sometimes they don't get the respect that they deserve. I think we're grappling with some really important questions and issues, and very often, I mean, as teens, when we're teenagers, we're grappling with really important stuff, like some of what Adi was talking about, you know, like, who am I? How do I fit in the world? How much of myself do I want to expose? You know, how brave can I be? And those are themes that are super important. I love the openness of the teen reader to, like, you know, you're creating yourself, right? So you're like open to being in many different ways. That's why I really, really love adult readers who read YA, because like maintaining that openness and that ability to keep coming back to those really fundamental questions of identity and like how we fit in, I think is really awesome. So I like to play with stuff like that. Like, who are we? How do we, I think a lot about how do we find our voice, like in this book, very literally, but throughout a lot of my writing, it's like, how do I find the way to speak this thing that I have inside me? Like, how do I be authentically myself when I'm not sure if the world's going to, you know, accept it? So.
And people don't realize how perfect young adult books are. Like, as an adult and a librarian and an English teacher, like, young adult books teach us so much about ourselves, about the children. Like, I'm a young adult librarian because that's all I want to read in life. All I want to do is, you know, my whole life revolves around young adult novels and young adults. And like, and I always feel that way. Like, I'm always a happy, like, it's just I'm always 16 and in love with my, you know, latest book person, my book boy. And I just think young adult books are beautiful for any age. And sometimes, you know, when people like to make fun of like adults who read young adult books, like, oh my God, why do you read Twilight? It's like, there's so much in a young adult novel that can teach us so much about ourselves and about the world around us. So don't ever knock young adults.
Definitely. I mean, there's nothing like getting pulled into a young adult novel where you pick it up and you're like, oh, there's another, and then you're like, oh, I'm in. Like,
Yep.
I got that with all of these, so that was great. Even though the stories aren't they were mostly nonfiction, but definitely with Love and English really getting pulled in. So I guess just to follow up with that, I think one of the things I found interesting too is with young adult, the immigrant experience is that generally young adult and children, they don't have control, right? So that seemed to be really interesting as sort of the parents or the family or forces outside of people's control land people in a situation where they have to navigate it as a young person. And just wondering if you have any anything that would sort of say to the kids in that situation, or thoughts on that, if there's anything else to add.
I will go first. I was in that situation. And, you know, I also wanted to speak to what Adi said about immigration stories being complicated. My family has also been on the move for several generations. So my grandparents, after the Spanish Civil War, left Spain with my parents as babies in tow to go to Argentina. And then my parents grew up in Argentina. And then when they were in their late teens, early 20s, they came here for what they thought was a temporary stay. And then all these years later, here we are still. And so there is this feeling of like wandering the world, kind of looking for your place. And for a, you know, I mean, it's a long conversation, but for a kind of a bite-sized bit of advice to a child or a teenager in that situation is like, you can own all of it, like, you know, because there's a lot of myth and some of it is warranted, like, oh, you've come to the land of opportunity, be happy. And like, there's that. And there's also the alienation of not speaking the language or the people you left behind. Or there is this feeling of, yeah, so maybe we came here for, you know, quote, a better life, but then all of my family, you know, you see pictures now, especially with social media, but even when I was a kid, we'd get like pictures of all of them together at Christmas. And here it was just the three of us alone, like in this little basement apartment and stuff. And like, you do lose something, and it's okay to mourn that while also being grateful for all the opportunities and the doors that open up to you here. It's a complicated, layered experience, and you can be with all of that and not feel bad about like, I should be happier to be here, or I should work hard to go home, or, you know, it can be complex.
Right.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I moved briefly to the US when I was 13 and then back to Mexico. But I also wonder like how much, you know, when the move is privileged the way that mine was, that it's not like, you know, there weren't it was a comfortable move, but it's still, as a kid, you aren't in control of almost anything in your life. So like where you're living is such a big part of that it's just like another thing that you're not in control of. And I could see how overwhelming it can be to kids. And I think Maria's message of like, it's okay to sit with all of that is great. I think there's a lot of like big things that maybe as an adult we can handle easily, and like, you know, we can see rationally, we can see the bigger picture, that for kids it's more difficult. But yeah, sit with all of it, the joys and the griefs throughout.
And I feel like a lot of I want these children, and I know it's just, you know, my idealistic ways of thinking, to not be ashamed to be from another country, to not be ashamed to not speak the language, to not be ashamed to try to learn and get along, and for them just to be proud of their culture and who they are and where they're going, where they come from and where they're going. That's really important for them to see too.
Right, and to hear that message from adults and from other people, for sure. Great. So I guess I think a little bit more. I think we're gonna do the questions in just a few minutes. Just a really general question would be, what do you all have any sort of hopes or ideas of what the future might look like in terms of the sort of immigrant experience in America? Because I know Margie, you definitely referenced a lot of the sort of negativity that so many people are seeing. And then I think, when you're in reality and you visit someplace like the border in Texas, or you actually read a story written by a person who lived it, it's a much different, nuanced thing. And I'm just wondering sort of what people feel like. Is there hope? Do we feel like things are getting better, getting worse? The sort of any kind of future that we're feeling right now for your readers and for these kids?
I'll say this. I mean, I think our immigration system still needs a lot of work, and it's still not equitable, and there are all kinds of problems. But when I feel the most hope is when I talk to teens. So, when I talk to kids in general, I do school visits, and the next generation gets it, like way more than some of our generations. Like they have grown up, in this digital world where they have access to a lot of different people, and they just have, like so much more acceptance. And like, yeah, of course, things that we would have all heard growing up, negative words or slurs or whatever, kids say, like, who says that? Like, no, what are you talking about? Like kids are way ahead of adults in many ways. So when I need a little dose of hope, then that's when I, because the problems are real, but they're inheriting the world. So I think the kids are going to make it fine.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think like the negativity is the loudest that it's ever been, because the megaphones are very easy to access with the internet and everything. But there's a lot of positivity, even in just like how many more immigrant stories are being published in YA space, in literature in general. Like it's far from, it's far from where it should be, but there's been improvements, and there is a lot of hope for what even the kids right now who get to see themselves more often in stories in the wider media, just how that will impact society as a whole, I feel hopeful about.
Great. Yeah, and I think that that's a great place to start the Q&A. So if we have anybody who wants to ask questions, I think that I'm going to look in the notes and we'll see what we have, if everybody's ready for that part of it. If anybody has anything else to add before we open it up. Okay, let's see. We'll see what they're asking. And if anybody wants to ask a question, please let us know. So I'll just start with the few that I have. So the first one is, Ms. Longoria, do you plan to do another anthology?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much. I do. I plan to do 2 more that I have like in my, like I'm working on right now. So yeah, thank you. Okay,
great. And will it be sort of the same themes, or is it something different?
They're going to be somewhat the same things, but a little bit different. I'm not really allowed, can't talk about them yet, but I'm really excited about them, and I think they're going to be wonderful.
Totally understand. Great. So then this is for everybody. What does it feel like when you hear and see kids appreciating and feeling heard in the stories that you've written or shared? So that's from Jocelyn. So just sort of, what does it feel like for you all when you hear and see kids appreciating the stories?
I mean,
It's
for
like
me,
I'm sorry, Adi, go.
Okay. Yeah, it's one of the best parts of the job for sure. Like it can make your day, your week, when like I'm on 2 deadlines now, and like in my head all day and just like wondering, am I good at this? And to even get like a tweet or an Instagram message or an email saying just like that a kid connected to one of my books, it makes the whole thing, you know, like worth it. And just like it's the joy, it's why I'm doing it. So yeah, I love it.
And what about Margie or Maria?
It's a lot of fun. Like I didn't even realize, whenever I went into this project, I went into it with like an English teacher, librarian state, like in my mind, like what I wanted for this anthology. I wanted it in classrooms. I wanted it. I didn't really go into it thinking like that I was going to get like people who would reach out to me and tell me, like I was at a book thing, a couple, and you get these really beautiful messages from students, and that's the funnest part, like to get them from the kids. But I was at a conference, at a book festival in March, and this librarian, she came up to me and she told me, you know, that she was so excited. She wanted to meet me because she was crying. So then I start crying. And, you know, and she says, you know, it's because like when we were kids, she was already, you know, she's a little bit younger than me, but she's like, we didn't have stories like this. Like we didn't have stories about Mexican Americans where we could see ourselves. She's like, so this book, she goes, you know, I know it's, you know, we write for the young adults, but it's like for the little young adults in us that we didn't have. And now that we have it, and it just made me so like, I just thought like, wow, like I didn't think about all that stuff whenever I went into this kicking and screaming and fighting with everybody, because I wanted these stories to be out. And I think that's the best part, is that it was real unexpected, and it's just been super amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's the best. I'm reminded of a story when you mentioned the book festival, Margie. I'm reminded of a story. I have, you know, I've done a bunch of festivals and stuff, but there was the one in the fall. I was sitting next to a buddy of mine, and she had to leave early, so it was kind of like wah the last hour of the festival, just sort of sitting by myself. And the bookstore tent was, you know, I don't know, I'm bad with measurements, maybe 30 feet away, far enough away that I could see it, but like no one was really looking at me. And my book was on the corner, you know, the display of my book was on the corner. And I was able to watch as a teen, walked over, like was looking at all the books, walked over to mine, picked mine up, turned it around. I could see her reading and it was like this moment of like, will you, won't you? And then she like walked over to the register, and I guess they must have pointed out, oh, the author's here, you can go get it signed. And she walked over to me, and it was like, it's the magic, like it's so lonely and like lonely sounds negative, whatever. It's like you sit by yourself and you just type on your little keyboard for years and years and years, and like first you hope an agent will take it, and then you hope an editor will take it, and like all of those years later to have that moment of seeing it connect with a reader when they don't even know that anyone can see that it's connecting, like something I thought and said, with the help, of course, of the wonderful HarperCollins marketing department, because it's the copy that must have sold it. But you know what I mean? It's like this cool moment of, oh, you wanted it, and it said something to you. It's amazing. Yeah, it's a great feeling.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think you know, just even being able to see these books in libraries and in bookstores is probably really affirming for a lot of kids, and also interesting to everybody. So that is good answer. I'm going to look for, I think we have a couple more questions. Let me just look. Sorry, I actually have been doing really well with the technology. I feel like, nothing horrible. Let's just see what they have. I don't see any more hands up ones, but I have a couple more questions. Let me just get to the right thing. Okay. All right. And did any of you, this is for all of you, did you find parallels between yours? This is not as much for Maria, but did you find parallels between the different stories, or were you surprised by the so many different experiences? So when you look through that, I guess that's the question.
I think both. There's a lot like that can, throughout the 15 stories and come on in, there's a lot of like emotions and similarities among the stories, but they're all such unique experiences. Like from, stories of like kids moving from Fiji to Canada, or we have one nonfiction story in there about an author, Elia Don Johnson, moving from the US to Mexico. And just like how finding a new home and saying goodbye to a place and adjusting it's an immediate connection to others who have lived through that. But all of these stories are unique. They're all happening to very different people under very different circumstances.
Okay.
I loved about this whole process to be an editor of an anthology like this was how all the stories, I remember I would get them at different times, and then whenever I would finally I would be able to talk, or one of the authors would tell us what the motive, what they were thinking behind the story, why they did the story. And then it just it was wow, and then we did this pre-COVID. We sold the book pre-COVID. Now we measure time pre-COVID and after COVID. And it's a very real thing, because pre-COVID, everything was hunky-dory. COVID happens, we're all in lockdown. The manuscript's due in October 2020. We start having people, my cousin passed away. I had a couple of authors, a couple of my contributors whose parents had passed away. So then everything, it just becomes something different, how we went into it with one mindset, and then how we came out of it with another mindset. It was more, I remember saying if you all can't give the story, if you all can't do it anymore because, we were in a time crunch, and then it was just a terrible time. Everybody was so awesome, turned in their work, and just to be able to get that during the time that we were going through was just so every single one of these stories means so much to me, and the motive, the author behind it, and being able to give me the story, even though we were going through this crazy time in the world, that just makes this book for me just so much more beautiful. And that's why it was so important for me to make sure that we got it out into the world when we did.
Right. And I think that's an amazing just point of, no matter what's happening in the world, we always have stories, we always have books, and we can always have your work to read. So that's, and to edit and all the other things that you've done. So that's great. I think there's one more question that is part of the Q&A. So actually there's a comment and there's a question. So there is just one person recommending a Sandra Cisneros lecture called River of Voices, Documented and Undocumented. So she said that we could try to find that online, which I thought was an interesting comment. But I think a question would be, and this is, you probably always get this one, which is just who are you reading? What would you recommend? What's inspiring you right now? And even if it's movies or music, but especially books, what could we read? So I think there's adults and teenagers, kids on the Zoom. So anything for everyone.
So I'm a huge Emily St. John Mandel nerd. I loved Station 11 so hard. So what I've loved, I definitely have to have a post-apocalyptic book in me at some point, because I'm weirdly drawn to post-apocalyptic fiction, which is not at all what I've written so far. But so if you know Station 11, it's about, actually she wrote it many, many years before the pandemic, but it's about a deadly pandemic that kills a large percentage of the population. And it takes place before that happens, just as it's happening, and then 20 years in the future, and it's brilliant. Anyway, so her new one, Sea of Tranquility, if you liked Station 11, or if what I'm describing sounds intriguing, it scratches a similar itch. There's time jumps, and there's her beautiful writing. So that's my favorite. that I've read recently. I'm also reading The Lincoln Highway, which we could definitely have a long conversation about because it is not billed as YA. It's this like thick book. The two protagonists, well, the two of the main protagonists, it's got like 8 POVs, but the two of the main protagonists are like 18 and 9. So in another universe, that would be a YA book, and it deals with coming of age stuff and whatever, but it sits on the adult shelf. So it's also an interesting conversation of like, who decides what's YA and what's not and why. And so I'm enjoying that, although it is a thicker, longer book, so I'm not through it yet. But that's what I'm reading.
Great. Great recommendation.
Asking me for recommendations is not, I can sit here all day, but right now I'm reading Debating Darcy. It just came out. I'm a big Jane Austen fan. I'm a big diverse books fan. I love retellings of Pride and Prejudice. I love retellings of everything. And I love YA and romance. So this book, I've been wanting it for months. And finally it came out on Tuesday. So it's called Debating Darcy, and it's a diverse retelling of Pride and Prejudice. That's what I'm reading right now.
Nice.
Wait, I'm actually going to cut you off, Adi. I know you've got to go, but I have one more recommendation. I think it was Helen who mentioned Margie's Instagram. And this is not a plan. I am definitely recommending Margie's Instagram because I've never seen anyone be happier and more positive on Instagram. She's always like, look, I'm reading this, or like, look at this, my book boyfriend. Well, you know, like she's a hoot on Instagram. So that's another one of my recommendations. Follow Margie.
Thank you.
I'm currently reading My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I feel like I'm just getting into it, so can't give it a huge recommendation yet. But I did recently watch Everything Everywhere All at Once, and a huge recommendation for that. That was like such a fun ride, and deep and goofy, and to do all of those things at the same time. Highly recommend going to watch it. Yeah. I'll actually, there was another book, recently got to go to the beach to get away from the Chicago winter, and read a rom-com called Accidentally Engaged, which I forget, I don't have it in front of me, so oh no, I do.
I did read that one.
Farah Hiran.
Like a green cover.
Yes. Yeah. I thought that was so well done. My wife doesn't usually like reading rom-coms, but she was hooked, and she really enjoyed it. So that's a good one to go get.
Great. Good. I've read all of those, so I don't know if we're on the same page, but I wrote down the other ones. I've read the Mandel, of course, but I wrote down Debating Darcy and The Lincoln Highway. Those both sound great. So that's always exciting to get the recommendations. So thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. So I don't know if Helen's on, but I think there's time for one more. Or if she wants to jump in.
Are there any more? I think you've covered them all, haven't you? Or does somebody have their hand up?
Yes. I think we're good. I think just, so the Debating Darcy authors coming to Oblong, is that?
Yeah, Santani, we're having a romance reads, a YA romance reads panel in June, and I just finished reading the arc of that, Margie. It's so good.
Great.
So she's coming, so that'll be great.
That's awesome.
Guys, thank you. Adi, Margie, Maria, Nora, thank you for moderating, and thanks for spending part of your Sunday afternoon with us. That was absolutely great. I will say these are all 3 books that belong in every school library, and highly, highly recommend them to teachers and students alike, and recommend them to your friends because you'll love them. Copies of Come On In, Living Beyond Borders and Love in English are available at Oblong Books and online at oblongbooks.com, and the link is in the chat. Before we close, I'd like to extend our thanks to Rosie for providing seamless translation, and to publishers Inkyard Press, Viking Books, and for young readers, and Balzer and Bray for helping make this event happen. Yay, publishers. And thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon. Have a good rest of your Sunday evening. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye, Rosie.